Here we go. Around as Climbing the Pocket Network presents Jason and the boys talking everything Minnesota Vikings. Watch the countdown timer.
Away we go again. Lost like I'm lost on purpose. If found, please return to. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home, girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home, my vision blurry, I'm paying the cost. I'm not enough. In fact, it's even better when you're not involved. When I miss your call, I feel that I evolve. Cause as you mentioned, I am more dependent than a college student on their parents, or an old person on their pension. Not to mention, when you hit me on WhatsApp without attention, and a bad booty bitch watch, then she looks tempting. Look, my Achilles heel is when I say what I feel, you say, baby, come home, and I don't think that I will, cause all this motherfucking stress is gonna get me killed. Woo. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home, girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home.
Huddle around as Climbing the Pocket Network presents Jason and the boys talking everything Minnesota Vikings.
No, I can't play these games. No, you can't disrespect and call me names. Sending me signals like you about to switch lanes. Well, go on, do your thing. Go on, do your thing. I mix champagne and propane, get lit. I'm trying to forget all the things that you said, all the things that we did. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home, girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before. When I get home, watch the breakdown. And I get home when I get home. You just gonna act like we normal now. Good luck. Don't you try to call me with that bullshit, telling me you're sorry. You act too quick. That's somebody else's problem now. You're somebody else's problem now. Don't you try to call me with that bullshit, telling me you're sorry. You act too quick. That's somebody else's problem now. You're somebody else's problem now.
Welcome to Climbing the Pocket Network's In the Huddle, where your favorite Climbing the Pocket personalities get together and talk all things Minnesota Vikings.
Boom. We are back. Yes, Raymond, we are late, but we are here. We got royalty with us today, and sometimes, things take a little bit time. You got to get stuff set up, but here we are. We're back. Another episode of Climbing the Pocket in the Huddle. I am your host, Jason Brown. You can find me on Twitter at BrownJason, and he is back. The man, the myth, the legend, my good friend. Not friend of Vikings Twitter, but my good friend, the good doctor. Eric, how you doing? How you been?
I think this is the third Vikings podcast I've been on in the last 36 hours. I'm excited to talk about the team. I'm excited to preview the NFL. Been a little bit under the weather for the last 24 hours, but I think that's just in preparation for how much fun it's going to be to watch NFL football, real football for the first time in a long time.
Hey, thanks, Ray.
I love it. Next up, my man, wide receiver one with the fresh cut. How we doing, Miles?
What up? I've had this for a little while. Got started a new job. You gotta get a new cut.
There you go.
No, things are things are good. Just tired. That's it. Nothing new there.
I mean, what? It's like you got some kids at home or something? What's going on? Why are you so tired, man?
I mean, something like that. You got I got a premature daughter whose esophagus doesn't want to develop fast enough, so she doesn't like to sleep well. So, we got to take shifts, and I get to sleep first tonight, and then I got to wake up in the middle of the night, and so let's hurry this up so I can go to bed.
All right, there we go. Well, the man has spoken, and the most wholesome man on Vikings Twitter, with the playoff beard still going strong. Nick, how we doing?
Now I can't shave it, I guess, if it's a playoff beard. That's what we're deeming it. I'm good, man. Had a good Labor Day weekend. Doing my fantasy drafts, getting into it. Season's like it's here. It's Thursday, so it creeps up on you. So I'm excited.
There we go. Well, Nick, obviously we're here to talk Vikings, and it's been a little while since we had you on. And you were giving us a couple of different scenarios for the Vikings season today with your tweets. You were giving us the upside, the downside. But, let's start off with some positivity. When you're looking at this Vikings season, like what are the things that have you super excited and feeling like maybe this could be a season for the Vikings to shock the world and make a run, do something in these playoffs?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see Justin Jefferson again. I mean, last year when they were kind of in a skid, it was still really fun to watch the Vikings just because of Justin Jefferson, his route running, his deep ball ability, his ability to make plays after the catch. Just a really complete receiver, even as a rookie. Really excited to see what he does in his second year. Dalvin Cook, I think one of the most enjoyable runners to watch. I don't know if he's the best runner. He's certainly in that conversation, but just to watch guys like bounce off of him, I'm really excited to see him again. Adam Thielen gets overshadowed because of First Diggs and now Justin Jefferson, but a really great route runner, really great at the catch point, really fun to watch. And then I'm excited to see Danielle Hunter back. Last time we saw him, he had 14 and a half sacks. Finally was really taking the leap from not just a guy with a lot of potential, but a guy who was putting it all together. Seems like he's like maybe our best player coming out of camp. So really excited to see him, and the rest of the guy, Harrison Smith, see if he can keep it going. Patrick Peterson, see what he looks like, if he's going to bounce back or if he's going to tail off. Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, we'll see if Barr's healthy week one. But I think this team has a lot of Pro Bowl caliber talent. We'll see if they play up to it, but I think they've got a lot of good players who can be difference makers in 2021, and either way should be fun to watch if they can all stay healthy. So I'm excited to watch them.
Miles, Nick said right there in the end, he kind of gave us the big thing kind of hanging over things, the if they can stay healthy. Coming out of camp, something we've talked about, the Vikings are a bit top heavy. But as you start to come through, and obviously the unofficial depth chart is out, you really start to dig in and look at this Vikings roster. I guess, what are your thoughts, especially now that you can start to think about them in a matchup against another team? Like, how are you feeling going into the season right now?
The offense in itself should still roll the way it did last year. Losing Irv Smith's a big deal. I think it's going to be really hard to replace him because I think he was going to be a big part of the offense. But overall, the structure and everything that they have in place for the offense shouldn't change. Dalvin Cook's going to see the ball a lot. They'll target Jefferson and Thielen a lot. So I'd expect the offense to roll better than we saw during the preseason and camp. Defensively, I think to Nick's point, they brought in a lot of talent or potential talent, and with what they already have. I think the question I have is there's a lot of new faces, so it might take a little while for that to gel in games because he didn't see a lot of them play during the preseason. So I think that it could take a little bit. And the Bengals are probably a good test just because they're probably lucky the fact that Joe Burrow's coming off an injury. But they have a high-powered offense, and Joe Mixon and the top three receivers they have in Chase, Boyd, and T. Higgins. So that offense could be pretty good. Their offensive line's a little suspect, but so is the Vikings. So I think the Bengals have a worse situation, but their weapons in general are really good, and so it'll be a good test for the Vikings to see how they stand up against a team with legit pass catching weapons like the Bengals have, and it'll be a fun matchup for sure. So I agree with Nick. I think what we talked about, it's top heavy, but week one, as long as you can kind of get the majority of what you guys have. I think Barr is the only guy that I don't expect to play or would expect much from in week one. So other than that, everyone else seems to be ready to roll. I'm excited to see DJ Wanham get a chance to be a full-time starter. We'll see how many snaps he actually plays and if he could be an impact, but I'm excited to see him get a chance because they need some of those mid-round picks to develop. And he's a guy that if he could hit would be a big deal.
All right, Eric.
Miles, is that true though? Because I feel like Darashaw was supposed to be a starter. Obviously, you said Barr. Wyatt Davis.
We can't blame Darashaw though. That one's like
I'm not blaming any of these guys. I'm just saying that like when we came into August, we thought, you know, Kirk. Well, for one, we thought that like Kirk would be a functioning citizen of the earth. We also thought that Christian Darashaw would be the left tackle. We thought Wyatt Davis would be the right guard. Now it does look like Oli Udoh has played well, preseason notwithstanding. And then obviously you have Barr. You also have Wanham starting because Stephen Weatherly was trash and was always trash. And
yeah.
So, and then you also have Cam Dantzler, who was supposed to be like, we were supposed to see depth at the corner position. And now we got something called Chris Boyd, who is starting over a guy who was supposed to be the gem of the Rick Spielman, you know, the second gem of the Rick Spielman 2020 draft. So like, I agree that like once you've sort of like Trump brushed the rainforest out, there is just one player who is injured that won't play on Sunday. But like, it's a little lower than expectation, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, overall, yes. I mean, the one thing with Darashaw, I mean, we expected him to be the starter. I would say if he was healthy, he probably would have been the starter. But you know, a setback, having an injury, and those things, like those are just unpredictable. You can't predict those things. So that one kind of gets a pass for me in that way. Everything else, I think you're spot on. Like Cameron Dantzler is supposed to be. I was told before camp started, I saw people put out a list of like if you had to protect 3 players for the Minnesota Vikings, if there was an expansion draft or what have you, and you could only protect 3 players or 4 or whatever the number was, Cam Dantzler was like up there for a lot of people. They were coming at me telling me I should be including Cam Dantzler, and I said I needed to wait to see on that one. And well, he comes out of camp as the bottom of the depth chart and didn't look good in preseason, didn't look good in camp. So to your point, it's really difficult to get excited about some of that stuff when the Vikings had to bring in guys like a Patrick Peterson, a Bashad Breeland, a Mackenzie Alexander, an Everson Griffen back. They had to bring in those guys because the younger guys weren't playing up to snuff. And that's you could say it's part of the problem, but at the same time, your hope is those guys can still develop behind these veterans in some capacity. Because like a Cameron Dantzler in a perfect world he wouldn't have played as many snaps as he did last year.
Yeah.
Mike Zimmer probably would have preferred that too. I mean, that's usually how he's been molding his cornerbacks, is his young cornerbacks that he drafts. They usually sit and they play some snaps, but they have veterans in front of them. Well, the Vikings didn't get that. For some odd, weird reason, they chose to just go with an all-young unit last year, and I'm sure that had Zim up at night every week. So I think they're reverting themselves back, which has kind of been part of my issue with the Vikings under Zim, is they're always overcorrecting themselves. So they're just making up for what they didn't do right last year. But in my opinion, they're not doing enough to forward think into this year and beyond. But that's another conversation.
But that's it exactly, I think. And I agree, like none of these things are fireable, right? Like,
No.
You know, I think their offseason was generally good. Like, I think Rick did it, like this sounds, and I don't mean to be backhanded here, but Rick did a pretty good job of fishing himself out of a drowning that was his own doing in many ways, right? Because, but again, like you said, Miles, and they use, it seems like every other year they sort of like transition from using the draft or free agency to bail themselves out of whether it be bad decisions or I think bad process. So for example, the Darashaw pick, Like, I like the Darrisaw pick. I think it was probably the third best thing they could have done. And so I'm not going to give the Darrisaw pick a lot of flack. But the fact of the matter is the Darrisaw pick was a shove your chips into the middle at left tackle because you got so far up against the cap last year that you had to piss off a left tackle who, yeah, I don't think is the greatest guy in the world, probably a 40th percentile left tackle. But the 40th percentile left tackle is sort of what you would expect a healthy rookie first-round pick guy who's taken at pick 20 is going to give you. And so you exchange one relatively known commodity for a unknown commodity, but you place the same amount of expectations on that player. Mm-hmm. I think that's a bad process. I think, and the draft foibles that they've had. And again, I'm not even I don't think they should be ripped at all for Gladney. That shit happens, right? Like, you take a guy and something bad happens, but then you got to basically say, look, Brashad Breeland, you're matched one-on-one with Tyreek Hill tonight. Like that kind of stuff is again, it's part of, the negativity that I sometimes have, which is when your margins are so thin, these things get exposed. And I think reasonable people like the four of us can say, well, the Brashad Breeland thing, you can't expect him to do this. Well, it's like, but you put yourself in a position to have to expect him to do this because of the decisions you've made. And to me, I guess, you don't get a pass in those circumstances, in my opinion. Again, that's kind of where I stand on it. But everything could land correctly again. And I think, as Nick said, if things land correctly, they're probably a good team. I'm a little skeptical that it can all do it.
So Raymond just said, and I want to get Nick in on this point, because this is a point that Nick has made on a couple of occasions. We brought in good players. So what's the problem? What are we really complaining about if we think the players they brought in are good players? And so Miles and Eric have both kind of, in a way, attacked the idea that the Vikings are scooping up such great value in free agency, and that because they're getting such great value, they're obviously really shrewd, forward-thinking sort of moves. And Nick, sometimes I feel maybe you're on the opposite side of that. On the opposite side, where you're hey, they're bringing in good players for not a lot of money. Why is that bad? I guess, Nick, could you maybe give your perspective in a little bit more detail on why maybe you're not so down on some of these players that are brought in at discount rates who maybe have a bit of upside?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we agree the Vikings have done a good job in free agency, and it's smart to bring in Everson, Griffen as for veteran minimum. That's essentially free when you consider he's replacing somebody else on the cap, and he's probably better than most backup rotational pass rushers, even now at 34 years old, little out of shape. But guys like Dede Westbrook, guys like Sheldon Richardson for $3 million, that's a steal. It's not going to win or lose you any games, I don't think. But and that's really what it comes down to, is at the point where you're constructing an entire secondary out of free agents, which is what the Vikings have done. It's Harrison Smith and 4 free agents. Patrick Peterson, Bashad Breeland, Mackenzie Alexander, and Xavier Woods. That's an interesting way to go about it. But I don't know if you necessarily can build a good secondary out of cast-offs from other teams. That's the problem with it. So I think they're good. They're good moves, but it puts a lot more on the homegrown talent to be able to carry veteran free agents who almost by definition are, somebody who, they didn't fit in with another team. Now you can build a good team, a good secondary out of, free agents. I think we saw 2015 Broncos probably maybe the best example of it, but you're kind of banking on a lot of things to go right. And that's kind of the tricky situation the Vikings are in. So, I mean, these moves are good, but do they get the Vikings, over the hump of winning playoff games? I mean, I don't know. It's probably not up to Patrick Peterson. It's probably more up to how good can Danielle Hunter be? How good can Justin Jefferson be? So we'll see.
It's the same job, but also, real quick, Eric, real quick. Yeah, so for me, this is it's a Band-Aid move to help save jobs. We know that. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious at this point, because this is where, in my opinion, we should be raising our expectations for what this team should be this year. You have all these one-year rentals and this you have no plan for 2022 essentially, besides some of the current players that they have under contract. Otherwise, the rest of the 1 year rentals they could be gone. Who knows what'll happen? But the cap situation doesn't look great. So our expectations for this team should be high. It should be there shouldn't be a question about making the playoffs. This should be a playoff team. There shouldn't be a wavering idea that maybe they'll teeter their way into the playoffs. No. They should be a firm playoff team based off what they put in front of themselves and for how they've decided that they need to rebuild this roster quickly. And so, yeah, to Nick's point, I'm not saying that means that I think they're going to win the Super Bowl. But for me, expectations, and if I was the Wilfs, expectations shouldn't just be make the playoffs and whatever happens, happens. It should be we need to make a deep playoff run, and then we'll reconsider what we need to do moving forward, because you guys decided that I need to shell out. They shelled out over $40 million in like new money this offseason, and they have all that dead cap money as well. So the Wilfs are looking there like, well, that's all that money coming from my pockets. I need to see something from it. So for me, that's why in my opinion, we just need to raise those expectations, because this is a Band-Aid solution that they're putting on for themselves. So
well, and the thing is you're right about ownership, and I think that's one of the things that we're sort of more awake to now, which is the salary cap is real. You can get around the salary cap with any one deal. I think that's kind of the nuance of it, is like, if you want any one player, you can figure out a way, right? It's, I think Jadeveon Clowney of the Saints last year was the only time where a team was literally prohibited from signing a player because they had no space, right? You can figure it out, but it comes at a cost, right? Like, it comes at a cost to ownership. I talk about this with I messaged somebody, a friend of mine who does contracts for a team. I'm like, hey, what do you think of this player? And he goes, dude, we're under the cap, but we're $50 million over cash. We're already spending $50 million. We've already spent $50 million above and beyond what the cap number is, because we had to move money around. You have to escrow that money, and if I'm ownership, again, I don't have billions of dollars, but if I'm ownership, and you're going to make me escrow an additional $50 million in the season, I want results, man. And I want, for some teams, like, I think this is going to be a nice year because people are going to be excited about the Vikings. They'll go to the stadium. The stadium is where you can get an edge because the sales of merchandise and stuff are yours, unlike everything else, which is profit sharing. But, I think the Wilfs look down the pike and they say, oh my goodness, we're going to see a $45 million cap charge to Cousins. And you're telling me that all these guys I just spent money on are great, but they're all 1 year deals. So what happens when they're great? Come to the table and ask for 3 years, $30 million, right? Because Xavier Woods isn't that much different than John Johnson. He's maybe like 10% worse. So if he comes to Minnesota and plays really well, he's going to come to the table and ask for, like, everybody says, well, like, what's the risk of these 1 year deals? That's the risk. If you actually are good, and let's say that they have a season a lot like 2019 where they're good, but there's a clear distance between them and the Super Bowl teams, it's still going to be broken up, right? Because you're not going to be able to keep all these guys, and you're still going to require the draft picks that Spielman spent over the last 3 years. Like, I think it's 38, if I remember the number correctly. You're still going to need some of those to land, and I'm skeptical of that happening.
Well, and Raymond, to your point,
change gears.
I mean,
go ahead, Miles.
Well, no, just to Raymond's point, like, yes, they're good players. I don't think we're not disputing that. We're just talking about the questioning the process. But I agree. Like, this should be a playoff team. I don't think this should be a borderline playoff team, though. This should be a playoff team. The NFC's wide open. There's no excuse. You have a stable. We were always told you have stability at quarterback. That's the biggest need the Vikings have had in a long time. They have stability at quarterback. They have playmakers. They have a good overall defense. This should be a good football team. I'm not trying to question that. It should be a good football team. It's just the margin for error is razor thin. It's razor thin. There isn't much you can, like Zim even said it. One injury to, like, 7 or 8 positions, and you're almost not screwed, but you're essentially in a really shitty situation. And that in itself is not a fun situation that you want to be in.
Why don't y'all get mad why don't y'all get mad when Zim says it? Eric says it, and he's super pessimistic. Zim says it, and it's no big deal. But I want to switch gears a little bit because we're like, we're a bit into the show now, and there is actually a game for us to talk about, and it's actually a weird thing. It's something I haven't seen in a while, but Bengals fans are like talking shit, like with their whole chest too, like talking shit, like for real. Eric, you live in the hood.
I live here.
What is going on? Where is the confidence coming from these Cincinnati fans when they feel like they can put out tweets like, if you look at the Vikings, don't look at the Vikings roster too closely, you might get your hopes up. Like, are they looking at their own roster? I'm confused. Help me out. Where did this confidence come from?
Yeah, you guys, I'm painted as the negative person here. I'm on Minnesota this week. I'm on under too. Like, I think this game is gonna be like 24-10 or something. Like, I feel like that's how this is gonna go.
Zim would love that.
Zim would swell up so much if he saw 24-10. But like, sorry. But I actually think the Bengals have a chance. It's much more like think about COVID. Okay. The Vikings are like regular COVID. Okay. The Bengals are like a breakout case, like they're a breakout case, right? Like the chances are low, but I do think like if things land for the Bengals, they can fuck shit up. Like because they have, Tyler Boyd's one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. T. Higgins was great last year. And as much as Jamar Chase sucked in the preseason, aggressively so, he's the top 5 pick in the draft. And he's, and Joe Burrow's a nice quarterback. Joe Burrow is sort of like almost the exact opposite of what Kirk is. Like, I think Kirk is way more talented arm-wise, but he doesn't have like the swagger, I guess. Whereas I think Burrow's got the swagger a little bit, but he can't throw the deep ball. It's kind of weird. So, and you look at that defense, like they're losing Trey Waynes this week, which isn't great. But you actually look at their secondary, and their secondary is low-key kind of like the Vikings, where like no one is that good in that secondary, but they don't have like somebody who you point at and you're like, well, actually, Jesse Bates is very good. Sorry. But like it's Jesse Bates and a bunch of corners where you're like, oh, if that guy plays okay and all 4 other guys play okay, they could be decent. Where I think the Vikings have a humongous edge in this game is like the Bengals are actually going to be pretty good against multiple wide receiver teams because they're deep in the secondary. The Vikings are going to put all 3 linebackers on the field for Cincinnati, and like this is the second time I've used this joke today on air. But like I could get open against them, and I think that that's like one of the places where, like, speaking truthfully, like I don't think the Bengals are going to be able to hang with the Vikings in between the hash marks. Cook, it's a shame that Irv Smith's injured, but like Cook is specifically the one where if I'm Minnesota, I'm singling him up on the schmucks that play linebacker for the Bengals. Because I actually think the Bengals are decent in the front 4. They're decent in the back 6, let's say, if you count the secondary. But the linebacker level, they're terrible. And like I think that the Vikings could take advantage of them. And then I think on the offensive side of the ball, like, on that side, like, it might take a while for Burrow to come back from the injury. I think the Vikings are catching the Bengals at the right time in this case.
So the offensive line, but for the Vikings, we talk about it all the time. Nick, based on what you've seen in this preseason and based on this matchup that we have with the Bengals, what are you expecting to see from the Vikings offensive line? Like Eric said, we should be able to run the ball. How do you expect the Vikings to hold up in passing situations?
Yeah, the Bengals have an interesting defensive line. I think they're probably a little bit better against the run. They can probably go 5 stout guys. I mean, DJ Reader's a pretty good nose tackle. Trey Hendrickson is, against Rashad Hill. That's not a matchup that favors the Vikings. But I think Brian O'Neill will be fine. I think, if the Vikings want to be a wide zone team, and if they can reach their guys at the first level, like Eric said, these linebackers aren't good. They're going to get explosives on the ground if they can just find a hole and get through it. So I do think, the Bengals have a number of solid pass rushers. There's nobody who really scares me. And that's probably a point towards the Vikings just because, the Vikings probably would be worse off facing somebody who had one really, an Aaron Donald. I'm not sure what they would do with that. So I do think, I'm excited to see, are we going to see a leap from Garrett Bradbury? Are we going to see Ezra Cleveland? Now he's got a full season to a full camp. He's back on the left side where he played in college. Maybe he can progress a little bit. These guys are, the thing about this offense is it's still really young. It's the youngest offense in the NFL right now. So it's got some good players, and there's some reason to expect progression from, I think, Bradbury, Cleveland, Oli Udoh, even Brian O'Neill still technically on his rookie contract. So I think it'll be I think the Vikings are this will be one of the few games where the Vikings look better in the trenches, I think, on both sides. So we'll
how much stock do you put into Bradbury's I think it was 81.6 pass blocking grade in the preseason? Are we feeling actually confident about that, Nick? Because I know that you've been a staunch Bradbury defender in here when I've been throwing dirt on his name because of what he can do in the run game. Do we feel like maybe what we see in the preseason is enough to be excited about what might happen this season, or too few snaps? Yeah, go ahead.
The guy who's been most impressive in camp has been Danielle Hunter and Justin Jefferson. But after those two guys, the guy who's been getting the most buzz is Michael Pierce. And a big reason why is because Michael Pierce one-on-one matches up against Garrett Bradbury. And guess who's winning that one? So I think Bradbury, he's got short arms, which is part of why he's a center. But even for a center, he's got short arms. That just gives him a narrow window. If you're up against a Linval Joseph, this just giant hulking dude, boxer arms, and he can beat you to the punch and can just run right through you. It's tough to survive one-on-one and pass protection. I don't think Bradbury. I do think he's better, and I do think it sounds like he's improved marginally. But marginal improvement, you got to set expectations. Is he going to be an elite pass protector? I don't think he'll ever be an elite pass protector. Could he be an adequate guy who's not going to embarrass himself on the rare occasions that? And you mentioned I'm a Bradbury defender. Well, one of the reasons is that so long as centers are adequate pass protectors, it's one of the rare positions where they might be better off. They might be better off being good run blockers than pass blockers, just because most of the time a center is going to be double teaming a nose tackle. Most of the time in the run game, especially in a Vikings wide zone scheme, they're tasked with some of the hardest reach blocks, scoop blocks, second level blocks, because they have to snap the ball, get off, and then get up to some guy, usually a shade or a shade and a half away. So it's tough, and I think that Bradbury will still bring value. It sounds like from camp he's improved. He's in the third year where we expect guys to take a leap. That's when Jason Kelce took a leap. That's when Ryan Khalil took a leap. I don't think Bradbury's, deserves to be in the conversation with those guys at all or anything. But this is the year where we can start to see some improvement, and it does sound like he's trending in the right direction. Even if I'm not going to label him a Pro Bowler or anything just yet.
Yeah. I think this will be a good test for him, right? Because I like to sort of bring how other teams are talking about their players, talking about Minnesota. Bengals fans think the same way about DJ Reader and Larry Ogunjobi, the way that the Vikings fans think of Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce. Whether that's correct or not, I do think Ogunjobi has been a pretty good interior pass rusher for the Browns. From what I can remember, I don't have his stats in front of me. And DJ Reader was a very well-regarded free agent pickup last year. I believe he opted out or was injured last season. So it's going to be a good test for them. But I do think Nick's right. I think in the trenches on both sides of the ball, this will be a game where they have a decided advantage. And in fact, week 2 is probably another one. Watt and Chandler Jones are great, but that's just two guys. So this will be a good test for him, and it'll be a good test for the Vikings. I think again, this is a situation where if they can get through this first part here, find a 5 that works for them. Like that has been the formula for them in the odd good Zimmer years, right? In the even bad Zimmer years, it's the rotating stuff, right? It's the nonsense stuff. And because in 17 it was mostly the same guys starting every game. Not every one of them was actually that good, but it was the continuity. It was the quarterback controlling the pressure rate. In 19 it was something of an easy schedule, but also an offensive line that gelled together. That's a little bit of a worrisome thing with Darashaw and Davis on the bench right now. But, hopefully, over time they can sort of meld that together.
Are we worried at all about, Miles and Eric have both mentioned it. Is there, I guess, let me ask it a different way. Miles, as you look at this, and I know you talked about it a little bit, can you maybe go a little bit deeper on what makes you nervous about how the Vikings match up with this Bengals team? Because like you said, when we think the Bengals, we tend to think just trash, they're terrible, they're awful. But when you go and look at the actual matchup and kind of compare some of the PFF grades, it isn't as wide a gap as you'd expect maybe when you look at the Bengals offensive players versus many places on the Vikings defense. So as you're looking at this, is there anything that makes you a little nervous about this matchup and how it could go down, maybe in favor of the Bengals?
I mean, the only two things for me would be, like I said earlier, their weapons, their wide receivers, and Joe Mixon in the pass game. Eric Kendricks is arguably the best off-ball linebacker in football, or one of the best off-ball linebackers in football. But Mixon's really good in the pass game. But then you also talk about the 3 receivers they already have. The only benefit, in my opinion, that they have is, Chase is considered a burner. We haven't seen it yet, but I think the Vikings cornerbacks actually match up pretty well against the 3, because I don't think they're as worried about the deep speed as you would be from some other teams, from all 3 receivers. So I think that's a positive for the Vikings, but all 3 receivers are still really good. And so that in itself, if you give up a couple big plays to these guys and you start letting the Bengals open things up, that would worry me. I mean, if the DBs just kind of shit the bed and don't show up, which very well could happen. Again, we don't fully know what to expect from the cornerbacks. I mean, I think we all have an idea of what they're going to be, but we don't fully know because we haven't seen them completely. So this is a good test just because they do have good weapons. But that would be one. And yeah, I think from a defensive side of the ball, I mean, if DJ Reader and Larry Ogunjobi really decide to, and Trey Hendrickson get after Rashad Hill and Ezra Cleveland and Garrett Bradbury, then that's a concern. I don't expect it, but that would be the other area I'd be a little worried about. And because if they can get after the Vikings in full rushing 4, then they're just going to focus all their attention on Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. And again, what I've mentioned a lot is, who's that third option now? Can Tyler Conklin be that guy? Can he step up and become that guy? Does Dede Westbrook or Amir Smith-Marset or KJ Osborne, do they step up? Can they use Dalvin Cook in the pass game more, which we haven't really seen? I don't know. We don't know who that third guy could be. I mean, you kind of expect it to be Conklin at this point, but you never know.
Well, and that's the real hard part for Minnesota now, right? Is that you could always, when you defended the Vikings with the third option thing, you could always say, well, Irv Smith's an up and coming athlete. He could play in the slot. He can move around.
Yep.
And Herndon is a player who maybe has that potential. I get a little worried because the guy straight up disappeared, but you can almost sort of if you want to throw out all the data points for any player that ever played for Adam Gase, I could almost understand. So I'm going to reserve judgment. I do think they paid a lot of draft capital for the guy. Jesus, yeah. That was a pretty big trade. But it was always, okay, yeah, sure, but they have 2 wide receivers, but you can squint, and Dalvin comes out of the backfield, and and you have Irv Smith, who's a great athlete. And I think Irv Smith was primed for a good year. It was a guy that I thought that could have been decent. The issue is that Dalvin's a great screen back. He's a great dump off back. He's not and again, this is a very high bar, but he's not a Marshall Faulk who could line up at X and beat a corner on a route. So
they tried that in 2018, and there's a reason it didn't work. He doesn't. That's just not a skill set.
So it's the Vikings do unequivocally need somebody in that subset of players you mentioned, Miles, to step up and be a third wide receiver. And that if they would have gone out and traded some serious draft capital for a player like that, I would not have been upset. I think it's that important for them. It's not going to be a big deal in this game. It might not even be a big deal against Arizona. Can't cover $5 check, but like. Down the stretch when they have to score 30 points against teams and go score for score, and they're not able to control tempo with play action and running the football and stuff, I think we're going to see it. And like again, I think that just the way they run offense significantly raises the floor for what the Cousins signing looks like, but it significantly dampens the ceiling. And that's where I get worried is exactly what you're describing, Miles, which is the third receiver.
Oh no, Nick. Eric said it. He talked about ceilings again as you go in. And it's something that we've talked about without you here. So like, you're back and you can defend your take and maybe give us your thoughts on this. But Clint, we haven't talked about him yet. First year offensive coordinator, first real game that he's going to be playing in. What are we thinking about? What are we expecting for him as we roll into the season? Are we nervous? Are we excited? Like, what are your thoughts on what we're going to see? And is it going to be any different? Maybe, do you think maybe things might open up a little bit more under the younger Kubiak than maybe the Kubiak that we had before?
Yeah, well, if the preseason is any indication, and it might not be, for some coaches it is, they kind of just run their standard playbook. For others, they make a concerted attempt to not give away any secrets in the preseason. You can only go so far with that because you're still calling your offense. You're not going to make up new plays that your guys haven't practiced. That would defeat the purpose of the preseason. But from what we've seen from the preseason, it looks a lot like last year's offense, which is what we were told. It was part of the reason they liked hiring Clint Kubiak is, continuity, keeping things the same way. They like this wide zone scheme. They like what it does with Dalvin and the offensive line. They like the explosives it sets up in the passing game. We saw still a lot of run heaviness, a lot of runs on second and longs and second and very longs in some instances, which you hate to see. Maybe we'll see that carry forward into the regular season. I do think we saw some interesting wrinkles that Clint Kubiak added. There were some in the run game. That we saw a little bit more pre-snap motion, jet motion, orbit motion. That's fun to see. I think we saw a lot more sort of.
It's important too, Nick.
Yeah, and it's so easy to incorporate in this. Look at what McVay and Shanahan do with it, or LaFleur has done with it, and in recent years with this wide zone scheme, it just opens up a whole nother level to your defense. It does so many things. You can hand it off and get one of your best players. If you want to get Justin Jefferson touches because of how good he is, jet motion is a great way to do it. Just hand the ball off to him, and then they have to respect it the rest of the game. So. They're adding new wrinkles. We'll see if those translate necessarily into points, into offensive production. I do think the wide zone scheme is pretty foolproof just because I look at everybody else who runs it. It's all good offenses. It's the Browns, Packers, 49ers, Rams, Titans. You don't necessarily need studs to have an efficient offense with it. And that's part of the reason why it's taken, Seahawks are going to run it now. It's taken the NFL by storm. So I think the foundation is there and good enough to be this offense should be competent. But you really kind of need a Kevin Stefanski, or you need a little bit of Kyle Shanahan if you want this offense to take the next step, which that's kind of what we're hoping for. So we'll see if it gets there. We saw it with Stefanski. We did not see it with John DeFilippo. We'll see where on that spectrum Clint Kubiak goes.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like, I was talking about this with, I think it was Mackey and Judd the other day. It was part of the reason that Zimmer doesn't get along with Kirk is this going back and forth between, in 2018, they ran an offense that I think a superstar quarterback could have had success with, right? The Tom Brady spread the field out, distribute the ball, win with efficiency, don't make mistakes. And but there's a small subset of QBs who can succeed there, and especially so when things go badly. And I think Mike was okay, we paid you all this money. I just want to get you down the middle offensive coordinator, and I don't want to have to give a shit about making the world comfortable for you, Kirk. And that sort of blew up in his face. So then the last 2 seasons, to their credit, I think, but also I think lowering the ceiling, is they've gotten Kirk a very quarterback-friendly offense, obviously except for offensive line personnel. But we all agree that like they smashed a lot of the easy buttons the last 2 years and have made life easier on Kirk, but they've also accentuated the things that Kirk does well. He's a good quarterback. I put him as 8th, by the way, ordinal rankings. And I think Mike now resents him for that too, right? Because they've essentially poured resources into the offense to sort of make him happier, or to make Kirk better. And so now we're in year 4, and we're like, okay, well, you were supposed to be this superstar guy that we didn't have to worry about. Then you had to be a guy that took resource away from my defense for 2 years. And now you're a guy who won't get the GD vax. And it's just like, is this the leak that's in this like team where it's like that like sort of us versus them mentality that might hurt them, even though like, again, like I think they're coming backwards. They're coming back to it, Stefanski was brilliant, coach of the year. Kubiak is a guy who appeared in 7 Super Bowls, player coach. And now they go back to sort of the DeFilippo, which it's like, we're going to get just the next guy to be offensive coordinator here. To me, I worry about that transition. No one else is worried.
Yeah,
Jason,
I've been
you're on
worried.
mute.
Jason's on mute.
Jason's on mute, though.
Still can't understand Jason.
Jason's the coolest.
I'm over here just like
dude that's ever
screaming
talked
into
on
the
mute
void
on a
because
Zoom
Eric
call.
has me so shook. But like, yeah, I think that's obviously a big concern. But like, as we're getting close to the hour, I guess, getting into this first part of the season, and like some people have said it here, like Raymond has brought it up. Is there anything the team can do in this game that will drastically change your opinion of what this team is or isn't? Like if they go out there and light the Bengals up on offense, throw the ball all over the field, Cousins looks great. He doesn't have the slow start that maybe he's had in some other seasons. Does that at all change the perception for the people sitting here? Or is it like, yeah, it's the Bengals, so like, it's kind of an is what it is? Like, is there anything that can happen here that would maybe substantially change your thoughts on what the Vikings can do as we kind of look forward a couple seasons? And Miles, you so politely put your hand up, so like I'll go to you first on this one.
So for me, like if they were to go out and do kind of what Rick said, 35-14, pass for 300, three plus touchdowns, Cook goes for 120 plus, 2 touchdowns, like those types of things, for me, I don't think it changes the outcome of the entire season, but I think what it does is it helps provide a layer into this offense and the overall team that we're still confused about, that we're still unsure about, that we haven't seen, because we haven't seen them in its totality for this season. So them being able to come together and have a game like that for week 1, no, it might not change the entire season, but that would be a really good start for what they need to continue to roll the train going, because because of the razor thin margins, this team needs a game where they blow out a team like the Bengals, because they're better than the Bengals. So if they can go out and prove that and stamp that, I think that just goes a long way for the overall team in itself.
Nick?
Yeah.
Anything that happens that switches it up?
I don't know. I mean, this Bengals team and this matchup kind of reminds me a little bit of when the Vikings played the Falcons back in 2019, I think it was, where it's a team that, and we saw how that game went. It was like the Vikings cruised their way to a victory. Kirk had like 15 pass attempts because they got up early and then they just could run the ball out. And this is a defense that wants to play single high because Von Bell is better in the box and Jesse Bates is better as a roaming free safety. and they want to load up the box, and they want to try and stop the run with their stout run defenders. And their front seven is better run defending than rushing the passer. And so I think that's a matchup that favors the Vikings. And I feel like if the Vikings do what they want to do on offense, they should be able to put up points on this Bengals defense, especially, when the starting outside cornerbacks are Chidobe Awuzie and Eli Apple. If there were ever a matchup where Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen were ready to feast, it's against these guys. That's probably the softest matchup they'll see all year. So this is it shouldn't take a lot of effort necessarily.
I mean, they play Arizona next week, but it's
Arizona's
close.
close.
It's close.
Now,
It's close.
We are. If Kirk starts slow this year, there will be no excuses. I'm on.
100%.
These corners are so bad. So
Kirk
They
Timber
were
then?
they were 4.5-point favorites in that game. They're 3.5-point favorites in this game. So it's a very similar sort of expectation. I don't think anybody who's reasonable doesn't think the Bengals could win this game. I think they're 40-60. And I tweeted this out today, and again, it's just part of the shtick, I guess, which is it's a tough game as a Vikings fan because there's not a whole lot that can happen here that could make you overly happy about this game. If they blow out the Bengals, again, I'm not trying to be a dick, but it's probably because the Bengals suck and they're just taking advantage of it. I actually, if you want the perfect scenario for the Vikings, it's that Burrow plays a legitimately great game and they still outduel the Bengals, and it's sort of a go. We're last season there was a game when Herbert started his first game. It was this random game, and he comes off and he plays great. And he's he's got bullets everywhere, and he's attacking. I think it was the Chiefs or the New Orleans Saints, and New Orleans just came back and won the game, and it was oh, that felt kind of good because this young quarterback gave us everything we got, and we still won. I do think that, to me, if you're a Vikings fan and you want the best game, it's Burrow comes out and plays a fantastic game and you still beat him. I think that's that would be a great thing, both for the league but also for Minnesota.
Yeah.
All right, so
And no
Eric,
shade to Arizona. Just having fun. I like Byron Murphy too, by the way.
He's the slot guy though. He's their inside guy.
Yes, he is.
What's his face? Malcolm Butler just said, "I'm out." And he pieced out on the. They lost Patrick to the Vikings, and I think Robert Alford's one of their other corners, and he hasn't played in 2 years. So
he hasn't played 2 years.
It's going to get. Again, the Vikings have a decent path to 2-0 for sure.
So Eric, 24-10 Vikings. Are you locking that in? Is that where you're at with this one?
Oh,
Give
man.
me your prediction for how it's going down.
Let's go 27-13. I'll give Burrow 3 scoring drives.
All right. Nick, where you at with it?
Yeah, I think the Bengals are going to move the ball. They've got too many weapons not to. And I have more trust in Tyler Boyd or Jamar Chase or those Joe Mixon and what they want to do on offense than I do in Bashaud Breeland and Mackenzie Alexander, or Patrick Peterson, who I think can be solid, but I'm not necessarily expecting much more than that just yet. So I think they'll clamp down in the red zone like Zimmer's always done. So I think the Vikings, it'll be a relatively cruise control victory for the Vikings. Say, I don't know, 24 to 16 or something. They'll have a bunch of scoring drives, but they'll only knock it in maybe once. So,
all right, Miles, bring me home here. What are you thinking? How's it going? Is this close? Is it a blowout? What's your prediction for how this one goes down?
As long as they don't have to rely on their kicker to win them the game, I think it'll be okay. Which is still a big question mark. But for me, I think it'll be 27-17, something like that. I think to Nick's point, I think they'll have some drives. They'll have some good drives. The Bengals will, but Zimmer will do a pretty good job of making sure they don't get in the end zone too often.
Well, there it is.
After all that negativity, we're all cruising to victory.
I think it is. After all of that, boom, boom, boom.
One thing the one positive about all the 1-year deals is if the Vikings season goes sideways, they have a lot of trade chips that they can send off to teams. So there's that. Bashaud Breeland. So here's a prediction I have if the season goes sideways. Bashaud Breeland's getting traded back to Kansas City.
For who? Mike Hughes? Too soon? Look, I'm a Chiefs Bobo, but like,
who's the safety? Who's the safety for the Chiefs that they don't care about?
Oh, Thornhill? I mean, Thornhill would be a good piece for the Vikings, I feel like. But, yeah. The Chiefs have done a great job of picking up failed or injured, or in the case of DeAndre Baker, I don't know what the hell, first-round picks that, like, they stashed on the bench that end up being decent players. You know.
Mike Hughes is going to be good, too. I just know it.
Mike, you need Mike Hughes to be good. But that's it. We're not going down the Mike Hughes rabbit hole. We're not going down there. Eric, Nick, Miles, thanks for coming on. Raymond, Seth. Oh, man, we got some new folks in here. We got Freddie back.
A lot of concurrence. Thanks, guys.
Jeff,
what up?
What up? Thanks for coming on. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for hanging with us. And that's it. That's all. David, where you at? Did David tell us he was going to get a drink? Let me check the chat.
No, David's here. His camera's frozen.
Okay. Well, talk to the people, David.
Well, this has been a great show. I love a little bit of controversy, love a little realism, love a little optimism, especially from Nick. Tomorrow night, we continue with Vikings Happy Hour, and we want all of you to join us. And until then, as always, SKOL!
Play the music, Dave.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you're listening on your favorite aggregator, make sure you rate us. And always feel free to join the conversation here at Climbing the Pocket. SKOL, everybody.